I was at the hospice when my grandmother's breath turned to thread. Her eyes, which were always a soft brown, lacquered with humor and fire, found mine through the tangle of tubes and blankets. She curled her fingers around my wrist, the way she used to when crossing streets with me as a child, and pulled me closer until her whisper warmed my cheek. "Don't sell the house," she said, each word trembling. "There's something you need to see in the walls." Her breath hitched, her hand loosened. The monitor chirped its sterile lullaby. My mother, who hadn't left her side in hours, closed her eyes, mouth trembling, and pressed her forehead to Nana's palm. My Uncle Leo backed into a corner, pressing fist to mouth. My Aunt Rosa clasped a rosary so tight, the beads impressed crescents into her fingers. The nurse touched my shoulder. Someone started to sob. Someone else said, "She's gone." But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My grandmother's last words had landed like a lit match in a room full of dry paper. "Don't sell the house. There's something you need to see in the walls." We called it the house with a capital H, as if it were a person. It had its moods, its drafts, its old bones that clicked in winter. It sat square and stubborn on the corner of Whitcomb and Willow, a Victorian with a porch that wrapped around like open arms and a slate roof that whistled in a storm. The lemon tree out front had been there longer than any of us. Some summers, my grandmother would send me out with a wire basket and a long picker, and we'd make jars of marmalade so bright you could see sunshine through the glass. My grandfather, who died when I was 7 and thus existed in my mind as a deep laugh and the smell of pipe smoke, had bought the house for a song after the war. Everyone assumed it was because he was clever and industrious. Everyone told me he worked 20-hour days at the docks until he could afford something grand for his bride. "Your nonna deserved palaces," he'd say, patting the banister he had varnished. I could only afford this one. After we buried my grandmother, we gathered inside the house with our grief like puddles at our feet. The kitchen smelled like coffee and lilies. Friends left casseroles that no one ate. Nieces and cousins clung to their phones, scrolling old photographs as if the pixels might revive the woman who'd held us all together. Leo brought up money before the meatballs cooled. "It's an old place," he said, adjusting his cufflinks, always a little too shiny. "Roofs do." The porch is bowing. Half the windows don't open. He leaned on the island, fingertips, tapping rhythm on the granite. "If we sell now, with the market hot, we could pay off Dad's medical debt." "You could have some breathing room, Evie?" My mother stared into her mug. "It's complicated." Aunt Rosa snorted quietly into her napkin. "It's more than a house. It's a memory you can't mortgage," I said. My voice surprised me. I sounded like a person who knew something. I didn't. I only had the heat of that last whisper on my cheek. Nonna said not to sell. Leo's eyebrows arched. She said that on her deathbed. I nodded. And why not? His tone hovered, somewhere between curious and skeptical. "Taxes and insurance don't mourn, Maya?" What did she say? "She said there's something in the walls." I shrugged, feeling like a girl again, too earnest for this conversation. "She said, we need to see it." Leo let out a bark of a laugh. "We're supposed to tear the house apart because Ma said there's a treasure map behind the drywall? Come on." Rose's head snapped up. "She never says things she doesn't mean. She never said fairy tale things. my mother added softly, eyes still on coffee. If she told you, she meant it. She told me, I said. And she looked at me like she wanted me to promise. I expected someone to tell me I'd imagined it, that I'd spun grief into prophecy. Instead, we sat quietly, each of us measuring what it would mean to open walls and open wounds. In the silence, I could hear the house breathe, the radiator sigh, the soft tick of the hallway clock that had lived on that wall since VE Day. Finally, my mother put down her mug. We'll wait to list. 2 weeks, we search. We do it together. She lifted her eyes, and for the first time since Grandma's last exhale, I saw something other than grief there. Resolve love turned into a blade. We'll see what she left us. It was me who found the first hollow thump. I was tugging at a strip of faded ivy wallpaper in the back bedroom, irritated by how easily it peeled. The glue had dried around the edges, the corners curling like old leaves. The pattern made me think of my grandmother's dresses, the ones she wore when she cooked, greens and blues like a map of a forest. I rapped my knuckles against the plaster, listening for that cousin of emptiness that means there's space behind where you believe there's solid. Most of the wall answered with a dull thud of old wood. But one rectangle, between the second and third studs to the right of the window, sounded like a drum. "Leo," I called, "come here." He ambled in with a skeptical sigh and a butter knife. "You'll owe me if I have to spackle this." He tapped the wall where I pointed, then again, above and below. He frowned. "How did you know?" "Listen." I handed him the knife, my heart beating in the roof of my mouth. When he probed into the seam of the paper and scored the plaster, the line he made was chalk bright, old lime and horsehair giving way. There, beneath the first thin skin, was another piece of wood, thinner than a stud, with tiny brass nail heads at its corners. A panel. Rosa appeared in the doorway like a benediction, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. "What are you two doing?" "Following ghosts," Leo murmured, but his voice had lost its scoff. He wedged the knife under the panel and pried. The wood slid free with a sigh and a powder of old wall dust. Behind it, darkness. And then, as my eyes adjusted, a rectangle of tin tied with faded ribbon, tucked between two lath beams. It wasn't big, shoebox-sized maybe, flattened at the corners, dented like a bruised apple. The ribbon was the color of old wine. My heart did something foolish in my chest. "Be careful," I whispered, as if the box could feel fear. Leo set the knife down and reached in gently, fingers careful, and drew out the box like a magician producing a dove. He set it on the floorboards. I knelt, the old wood cool beneath my knees. "Wait!" My mother's voice came from the hall. We all turned. She stood there, hands in the bib of the apron she'd put on without thinking, wiping them as though she had flour on them. Her eyes were wet. "Let me." She sank down beside me and touched the ribbon. Its knot dissolved beneath her fingers, as if it had been waiting for the person to whom it belonged. She lifted the lid. Inside lay a stack of letters, tied with a second ribbon, this one blue-gray, like storm water, and a leather notebook with a crackled spine. On top of the letters was a small brass key on a chain, the kind you'd use to open a jewel box. My mother traced the top page with the tips of her fingers, as if she expected it to flake to dust. The paper was thick, not quite white anymore. I could smell old perfume, lavender, and something faintly citrus like my grandmother's. Lemon peels drying on the back steps. What if it's... Leo started, and then thought better of finishing. What if it's nothing? What if it's everything? Open the first one, Rosa said, her voice barely a breath. My mother slid the ribbon free and lifted the top letter. Her hands trembled. The paper crackled. She cleared her throat and began to read. My Alma. If I write to you, it is because speaking is too dangerous, and because words, when brought to ink, can become a kind of wall. I wonder sometimes if walls know what they hold. The ones between us are not brick or mortar, but years and expectations, and yet they feel as heavy. Still, I write, because I cannot bear to carry this love inside me where no one can see it and thus tell me it is real. I looked up. Alma, I whispered. Nana. Let me see the signature, Rosa said. At the bottom of the page, in a hand that looped low like a jazz line, was a name I didn't recognize. Jay. My mother read silently, then swallowed. There are more. She laid the first letter down and picked up the second, and the third. The voice on those pages was a man's, tender and wry, and more than anything, aware of danger. My dear, I do not know which is worse, the terror of losing you or the terror of wanting you so much that I could do something reckless. There is a world where we walk down Whitcomb Street on a Sunday afternoon, and no one looks twice at us. There is a world where I can hold your hand at the grocer's and ask you how much basil to buy for the Sunday gravy. And the man behind the counter does not stop me with his eyebrows. There is a world where you can be my home. It was easy to mark the time. The dates at the top of each sheet were neat and careful. The years marched forward like little soldiers. 1954, 1955, 1956. I felt it before we said it aloud. The heat between lines, the sting of it. She loved him, I whispered. She loved someone else. Rosa pressed the heel of her hand to her chest. Ma. Leo had sunk to the carpet, legs crossed like a schoolboy. And he loved her. He spoke as if forced to admire an enemy. Listen to how he writes to her. Jesus! There were 27 letters in that bundle. We read 6 before we had to stop because tears fogged the ink. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the clock demarcate a life in thin, iron seconds. We were no longer in the back bedroom with the peeling ivy paper. We were in a past that had been plastered over. We were eavesdropping on a heartbeat. I lifted the leather notebook. The knot in my stomach, the one that had been there since the hospice, tightened. I opened it slowly, as if skin might rip. It was my grandmother's. Tired of chaos at home? Unlock simple, practical parenting tips to create a calm and loving vibe. Since 2010, Parenting Simply has been your community for connecting with your kids and mastering easy skills to transform your home. Our mission: slash stress for parents and kids with powerful communication and organizational hacks. Say goodbye to doom and gloom. Parenting can be fun, joyful, and fulfilling. You've got what it takes to be an amazing, loving parent, and we'll show you how. Click the link below for stress-free parenting tools and join our community. Her handwriting scrimmaged across the page in fountain pen blue, upright and no nonsense. Letters lay down with the same practical finality with which she cut an apple, with speed and purpose. And yet, around the edges, here and there, a flourish, a softness. June 3rd, 1954. I met him where the pigeons come to drink, the iron fountain on 7th. He asked me for a light, and I said no because I like the smell of a man who doesn't smoke. He laughed and said he'd quit. I told him he didn't know me. He said he could learn. He has hands like a musician's. I told myself I wouldn't write his name, but I am writing this so I do not burst, so I can tuck the pages into a wall and someday not be a liar, even to myself. James. James. Not Jay, after all. James. Other pages were leaner, other entries spare. This is foolish. I am engaged. He kissed me, and it burned like brandy. My mother would die if she knew. He gave me a lemon hard candy for my pocket. So, when you have to taste bitter things, you remember there is sweet. He calls me Alma, like a prayer. The writing changed midway, a slant, a pressure. A line of ink smeared where a teardrop had fallen, and the nib had skated through. The start of a life. September 1956. The first cry filled the kitchen like morning light. She is perfect. She has your mouth, my eyes. Her hair is so dark it looks blue. I have never believed in miracles until I saw how your nose sits on her face, like it belongs to our table. I brewed coffee and cried into it. I love him. I love him. I love him. I am a liar. I married Anthony, and I tried to be the kind of wife this town understands. But every time she yawns, I see the man I should have married. My head snapped up. She? I said, my throat tight. Who is she? Rosa moved her mouth, then shut it and shook her head, as if to say, no, that cannot be. My mother, who had been quiet, reached for the letter with the date and counted backwards. 1956, she murmured. The first daughter. She looked at Rosa. Rosa looked at her. It was like watching two birds, siblings in flight, catch an updraft together. They were doing the math I was too wound to do. Your sister, Gloria, my mother said softly. But Gloria didn't live. Her eyes went wet. She died at a week, a fever. Ma almost followed her. The room went hot. He delivered her? I asked, stupid with grief for things. No, Rosa said quickly, as if she could throw a sheet over the thought. No, the midwife, Miss Irene, the one from the old brick. My mother turned another page. The entry was shorter, jagged. September 17th, 1956. She was cold. They took her. James did not meet her. He was forced to leave town for work. He writes that the world is changing, but it is not changing here. I will never forgive Anthony. He stood at the foot of our bed like a general surveying a field he bought. He said I was to forget. He said he forgave me my foolishness, as if love were a stray dog and not a bell. He said if I spoke to James again, he would bury me under the lemon tree. I realized I was holding my breath. I let it go and the air shook. Anthony, I said. No. I knew he could be cruel, my mother whispered. But Ma never. She never. She chose silence, Rosa said, looking around at the walls. She chose plaster. Leo rubbed his hand over his face. So there's a love story in the walls. So what? We were going to sell the house because of a love story? Because Ma wanted us to know she was a person? That She was more than a saint who kept the sauce from burning and smiled in the photos. When he said it like that, twisted, mean, just to guard his own ache, I wanted to slap him. Before I could, the key inside the tin winked. The little brass thing, no larger than a toddler's finger, glinted like a wink from a dead woman. "There's more," I said. "There has to be." "Why a key?" Rosa wiped her cheeks and pushed herself to standing. Grief had aged her 10 years in 3 days, and still she stood like a door frame. "We look," she said. "Alma never did things by halves." For 3 days, we scraped paper, tapped studs, peered into darkness. We moved like archaeologists, as if one too eager tug could collapse an entire civilization of secrets. I kept the notebook at my hip like a relic. My mother carried the letter bundle in her pocket like a saint's bones. Leo guarded the key, his palm always hovering near his chest, where it hung on its chain, as if someone might steal it, as if it might choose its moment and leap. We found 2 more boxes, one behind the mantel, nested in dust, and a sheaf of New York Times front pages from the summer man walked on the moon. In that one, under a cracked photograph, the young Alma with hair like a wave and a dress so white it must have been unsafe to eat spaghetti in, was a velvet pouch heavy as sin. Coins, gold, old and soft as butter when foiled, each stamped with an eagle or a king's profile, a folded legal document brittle with age, an old deed to the house with a second page amended in a careful, timid hand, a sale price that did not match the story we'd been told. The house had not been bought for a song. It had been bought for less. A man's signature scratched across the bottom looked wrong, sloppy. Not my grandfather's firm strokes, not the neat letters I recognized from the birthday cards he had kept on writing, even as his hand grew crooked. "Forged," Leo said, the word like a broken twig. "Hell!" The second box I found by accident. I tripped on a loose board in the hallway, cursed, and then felt air breathing cool against my ankle. The board lifted like a lid. Beneath, in a nest of old skirts and a folded man's sweater that smelled like cedar, lay a stack of photographs. They were not like the ones in the family albums. No Christmas trees, no cakes, no babies on quilts. These were private. Alma in a navy coat, laughing up at something beyond the frame, a man in a suit too sharp for our street, mirrored shoes, a trumpet case in his hand, 2 coffee cups on a radiator. Between photos, a napkin with Bixby's scrawled in grease pencil. Bixby's was the jazz club that had shut down when I was a teenager. On the last photograph, the light caught their 2 faces, my grandmother and a man whose eyes were mine. In that way, that blood insists on repeating itself through time. He was black. It made my stomach drop and soar at once, 100 things falling into place with one photograph. Why his letters were whispers, why the townspeople's eyebrows were characters in a story, why she had stitched her life into the plaster. My mother's fingers trembled as she held the picture up to the light. Rosa made a sound like a bench creaking under too much weight. Leo took the photo into his lap and stared. "James," he said slowly, tasting the name like the lemon candy from long ago. James, who would have gotten killed here for walking down Whitcomb with her hand. I remembered the neighbors who had lived here for a minute. When I was 10, the little boy who was my age and liked to play with bugs and talk to the pigeons, the way Mrs. Kellerman from 3 doors down had muttered at my mother, "Well, You know, the neighborhood. And my mother had snapped, "No, I don't know, Marcy." The big secret had a face now. It looked like mine. In the notebook, Nana's voice thickened, then thinned, grew quiet, and then flared like a flare from a ship at sea. October 1962. He came back to town with the Basie band and didn't tell me, so I wouldn't be tempted to burn everything I have and run. I had my baby sleeping upstairs. He walked past the lemon tree and didn't knock. He wrote me later, and I tore the letter to tiny pieces on the porch so I could toss them to the wind and say, I let him go. I did not let him go. I wear him under my tongue like a seed. I keep him in the wall so I cannot ruin your lives. And yet, I cannot go mad pretending I'm not alive. November 1973. Rosa is 10 and fierce. Evelyn is 12 and reads under the covers until midnight. Leo breathes like his father when he sleeps, and I forgive him anyway. I still wake thinking I hear a trumpet tune under the window. Once I thought I saw him buying oranges down at Mr. Alvarez's. He had gone before I could find cash. I told myself that was mercy. June 1981. I dreamed the house split, and inside were rooms filled with warm air where all my lies lay sleeping like kittens. Every time I open a door, one blinks at me and then goes back to sleep. If I do not wake them, they will never wake me. Maya is 3 and picks dandelions and calls them suns. She asked why Nono yells. I told her he has a thundercloud inside. I did not tell her that I have a sky. In one entry, folded inside the leather cover, as if saved from the comfort of the linear, was the piece that made me sit down hard on the floor. August 1969. He came, he knocked. I was peeling apples at the sink, and I thought if I did not turn, I would not have to admit that I could tell who it was by the rhythm. I turned. He had a scar along his jaw I did not remember from the inside of my skull where I kept his face. He smelled like rain and smoke and peppermint. We did not touch. We stood in the doorway and said nothing for a long time. He handed me a tiny box. Inside, a ring, not gold, the jade-colored plastic from a gumball machine. He said, "For the life that isn't." I started to cry, and then I started to laugh. I wore it on a ribbon under my blouse for a year, like a relic until it broke. I kept the green chip. It is in the baseboard in the back room, under the loose tile, with the other pieces of what we might have been. We pulled up the tile and found it. We found the chip, round and green as a candy, and next to it, a lock of dark hair tied with a thread, and a tiny tooth in an envelope labeled Glow/First Kid's Lost Tooth. As if by labeling it, my grandmother could wrestle the universe into sense. I held the envelope and began to sob. I didn't know I had tears left. The grief for a baby who would have been my aunt curdled and bloomed into something else. An understanding that all our lives had been built by women saying no to the noise and yes to survival. Leo put his arm around me. "Hey," he said, dimpling, a boy again. "Hey." I buried my face in his shoulder. "She asked us not to sell it," I cried into his shirt. "She asked us to see this. But why? What? To watch it ruin us? To let it end us?" From the doorway, my mother said quietly, "Or to save us." We all turned. She looked small against the frame, shoulders caved around that letter bundle, eyes wide with a kind of terror I had only ever seen on women delivering babies. Maybe she wanted to stop the story from writing itself again. "What story?" I asked, too fast, even as a version of it already bloomed on my tongue like a bruise. The one where women swallow what they want and despise themselves and take it out on everybody else. The one where we don't tell each other the truth out loud, so the house has to hold it. She walked in and sank to her knees and pressed her palms to the floorboards as if in prayer. Maybe she wanted me to say this to you, to both of you. She lifted her head to look at Rosa and then at me. Your father was not the only one who caused bruises in this house. The ground shifted an inch. She looked at Leo. Your father was a hard man. Everyone knows that. But I was mean in small ways. I told myself that being brutal with my tongue was better than being hit. I made rules that made no sense and punished my girls for breaking them. I taught you to use silence like a weapon. Her voice cracked. Ma didn't tell us because she thought she was protecting us. But it turned us into a family that suspects, into a family that loves like we're hiding it. It was like a window opening in February. Cold, shocking, clean. I had never heard my mother like this, plain and bright and unadorned by defensive little jokes. Part of me adored her for saying it. Part of me wanted to close that window and put a towel at the base to keep out the draft. Part of me wanted to scream that, yes, she had been cruel. Why had this house demanded so much of its women? And part of me wanted to lay my head on her lap and say, please keep talking until all that cold becomes a spring breeze. Rosa exhaled like a kettle letting go of its steam. So, what do we do with this? Leo's thumb rubbed circles on the little brass key. He had been quiet, thinking in that way he used to do as a boy, counting ceiling tiles to calm himself, reordering the pantry to keep from punching a wall. Assume there's a lock, he said. We laughed, too loud, because the relief of a practical problem inside a moral earthquake felt like a rope ladder, dropped into a chasm. Where would she have put it? I asked, excited to have a mission that involved muscles instead of this ache behind my bones. Not obvious, Rosa mused, but not impossible. We spread through the house like blood through a heart. We touched every baseboard molding, tapped every newel post. We found an old keyhole tucked into the carved scroll under the staircase. Long unseen, a little spider's web glinting like a bridal veil. Leo knelt, squinted, blew away dust. Hello, he murmured. And I fell in love with him again, my brother, the thing we all were together when the house was whole. He slid the key in. It stuck. He adjusted. Gentle. Old brass on old brass can seize if you strong-arm it. You have to ask, not order. You have to be kinder than proud. The lock clicked. The scroll slid, revealing a slim drawer, built into the staircase itself. The wood still smelling clean as a loaf torn open. Inside were two things: a folded sheet of music paper and a sheaf of legal letters, stamped with the crest of a law firm I recognized from the glass tower. Downtown. Rosa drew breath at the first. The paper was thin and thrummed with lines and dots like birds on wires. At the top, in pencil, that same slanted hand had written, Whitcomb Waltz, and beneath it, in my grandmother's neat block letters, for Alma, the only house I could never leave. My mother took the legal papers. I watched her mouth move as she read. Her face went through expressions I could not name. Shock, then confusion, then a thin pleasure so mixed with pain that I remembered the face she made when she tore bread too hot from the oven and burned her fingertips and laughed through the sting. It's a trust, she said. Ma created a trust for the house. Leo frowned. We knew that. No, my mother said. We knew she willed it equally to the three of us. We didn't know she locked it. She scanned. She named the house a charitable trust. Meaning? Rosa prompted. Meaning, my mother said, eyes bright with something like, could it be joy? We can't sell it. Not unless we can prove we're selling it to create the charity she wanted. Leo goggled. What did Ma want? My mother flipped to the next page and read aloud. The house at 112 Whitcomb Street is to be held in trust in perpetuity as a refuge for women and children fleeing domestic violence and for anyone who seeks safety or shelter. The house, having sheltered me, will shelter them. My mouth fell open. I did not know I had been waiting for a miracle until it arrived naked and unabashed, as if it had always been in the room, and we had only to hear it speak. It made so much sense that I wanted to reach back in time and hug my grandmother's old bones. Tell them I understood her language now. Rosa burst into tears so sudden and strange that I flinched and then laughed and then sat on the step above her and held her shoulders while she sobbed and laughed with me. Of course she did this, Rosa said into my skirt. Of course she did. Alma, clever, brave, bossy. Leo leaned back and laughed. The woman made sure I couldn't sell the lemon tree for scrap and buy Bitcoin. My mother pressed the trust to her chest and closed her eyes. She wanted me out, she said. Finally, so quietly that I knew this was the 50-year-old pebble in her shoe finally flicked loose. She wanted me out from under the idea that I had to stay because the house had always been the house. She freed me by keeping me. Do you see? I can't sell now. I don't have to be the villain anymore. I can be her daughter without pretending to be a saint. What about the debt? Leo asked. Practical because it was his scaffolding, his one honest favorite armor. Dad's bills? We can do both, I said, surprising myself. We open the house. We apply for grants. We partner with the shelter on 3rd, the one always too full. We run fundraisers. We get the Times to write about the Victorian Refuge with a jazz song in the walls. People will give. We make the house pay its own way. We pay down the debt. We do it. Together. I could hear how naive it might sound. I could also hear my grandmother laughing in my ear. Her laugh always made me brave by accident. It always made me feel like the world wanted me to be a bigger person than I believed I could be, and that if I failed at that bigness, she would make me tea and say, "Try again, Piccolo." Leo rubbed his jaw. Okay, he said, suspicious at first, and then soft. Okay. Rosa wiped her face with her sleeve. I can run the kitchen, she said, fierce in a brand new way. If women are leaving, some of them will leave with children and no diapers, with nothing. I can call every person I have ever met and tell them to clear their pantry of rice and beans. My mother smoothed the legal papers and set them back in the drawer, then lifted the sheet music and held it to her chest as if the notes could warm a rib cage. We need to find him, she said, shocking us all. Who? I asked, though I knew. James, she said quietly, if he's alive. Or his family. He wrote this for her. He should see what she did. Leo leaned his head back and looked up through the stairs spindles to the landing above, where the light from the dormer fell like a stripe on the carpet. You think he's alive? She wrote in 1981 that she saw him buying oranges, I said. It's not impossible. We can check Bixby's old rosters, Rosa said. We can ask Mr. Alvarez. No, he's gone. His son. We can check with the Jazz Society on Maple. There's a guy who always wears a blue scarf and knows everybody's secrets on vinyl. Leo took the photograph from his lap and held it next to me. You look like him, he said softly. Not a lot. Just enough to... He swallowed. Just enough to hurt. I took the picture back and traced the ridges of the chemistry with my thumb. It hurts like something growing, I said, like a tooth under the gum. He nodded. Like that. The town came to the viewing, in the way that small towns do when your dead have fed them, when your dead have poured their coffee and bandaged their children and lent them an egg when they were short by one. We stood in the living room in our best clothes and took the casserole dishes by the handles and sat them on the sideboard, and we said, again and again, yes, she went easy, though she had not, and yes, she would have loved to see you, which was true. We did not speak of the letters or the song or the trust. We made a plate for the teenage boy who ran hot pepper poppers from a tray like a sommelier of jalapenos. We accepted condolences from women whose husbands had thrown plates and wept and then promised to be soft, and from men who had 5 good jokes and no hug. We took it all. We took it all, and we put it on the old oak table my grandfather had planed. Then on the new plastic folding table Leo had brought in his truck. Then along the windowsill. Then on the piano. People pressed our fingers and told us about the pecan pie that Alma made the year. The power went out and how she had a whole neighborhood to feed. And so she made a fire in the yard and baked pies with the stars for stars. People leaned in and said, she kept my secret when no one else would. People said, she reminded me that the past is only one kind of gravity. We don't have to orbit it. When the house was finally empty and the hens had eaten what fell, I stood in the kitchen and slid the window open and breathed. It smelled like rain. I believed in God for 15 seconds. Tomorrow we call the lawyer, my mother said, patting my back like she did when I was 5, tilting the sticky bowl so the last pancake batter slide into the pan. Tomorrow we call about the trust. Tomorrow we call the shelter. And the Jazz Society, Rosa added. And the grant writer guy I met at the gala, Leo said. He was an idiot, but he liked Ma's walnut cookies, so he might like this. And if he says no, I'll post that photo of him dancing badly in the fundraiser suit. His grin flared. What? I still have to be me. Later that night, alone in the back bedroom, where the first hollow knock had started this unburial, I flicked off the bedside lamp and lay in the darkness with the old house breathing. I slid the photograph out from beneath my pillow and looked at it again. In moonlight, the 2 faces swam toward me and away again. Sometimes at night, if I stared at a thing long enough, I could make myself believe it had moved. Tonight, the photograph seemed to sigh. Everyone who had ever loved anyone had made the same face. That I shouldn't be here, and I'm here anyway, face. It seared. It soothed. Hi, I whispered to James. We're doing it. We're making our house a refuge. Somewhere inside the house, a board settled into a new quiet. Finding James was not simple, and it was not impossible. That was one of the first things I learned in the weeks after we opened drawers that had been invisible our entire lives. Almost nothing is impossible, and almost nothing is simple. It turned out that the blue scarf man at the Jazz Society had known him. James Nolan, he said, as if tasting it. Play a backbeat like a heartbeat. Left town in the 60s. Came back now and then to see some lady? He winked. Town talked like it had invented talk. We followed a thumbprint trail, a gig flyer taped to the bottom of a filing cabinet drawer, a librarian who pulled out a high school yearbook without using the computer. Sometimes I remember. Sometimes remembering is faster than typing. A black and white newspaper photo of a handsome young man in a suit, the same one, shaking hands with the mayor at the dedication of the new Civic Center in 1972. Someone had circled his face with a pencil long ago. In the margin, a schoolgirl's hand had written, "No!" with 5 exclamation points. Chemistry Inc. Then somewhere, in a scribble over that, another hand had written a little heart. From there, the search widened and narrowed. We put his name into the actuator of 1,000 little sliding drawers. Nurses who had known other nurses who had known his sister. A man who had leaned on a trumpet case at Bixby's Explainer of Solos. Donna, at the DMV, who was born with a memory like a sandpaper, smoothing the edges off other people's rough attempts at recalling. Nolan, she said, my aunt's neighbor. No, her neighbor's nephew. She clicked her tongue. The one who broke his jaw in a bar fight in '69 and came back playing sweeter than before. He used to bring my mother peaches. 2 weeks after we phoned the lawyer, the shelter, the grant guy, he was, indeed, an idiot and in love with the walnut cookies. And the blue scarf man in the maples. I stood on a sidewalk 3 towns over in front of a pale yellow duplex with an avocado green door and a fern in a macrame cradle. I wiped my palms on my skirt and knocked. A woman in her 60s answered, hair in a salt and pepper twist, eyes the color of my mother's. She tilted her head. Can I help you? I swallowed. Are you Mrs. Collins? I'm Maya. I reached into my bag and pulled out the photograph. I think you might know this man. She leaned in. The photograph drank the sun. Her mouth opened. One hand went to her throat. Oh, she said. Oh, God. She reached behind her and grabbed a shawl off the coat rack. She draped it around her shoulders like armor. Come in. Her living room smelled like chrysanthemums and toast. She poured tea as if she'd trained her whole life to pour tea for the person who would someday bring her grandmother out of a wall. She nodded at the picture on her coffee table. That's my uncle, she said, reaching a fingertip to his face on the paper. He was. He passed 2 summers ago. She swallowed, but I think he knew. He told me once that the best song he'd ever written was for a house. I didn't know I needed that until it smashed into me. I have the song, I blurted, tears springing like an old pipe she had forgotten to fix. I have it. He called it the Whitcomb Waltz. That's the one, she whispered. He whistled it while he peeled apples. Did he ever? I swallowed. Did he talk about a woman named Alma? She took my hand. Every time it rained. We said her name back and forth, rolling it like dough between our hands. Alma. She had baked us things we were still eating. I went home with a battered hatbox full of reel-to-reel tapes, a mahogany metronome, and a plastic ring strung on a ribbon threaded through with a second ribbon worn smooth by thumbs. When I laid the ring on the piano in our house, my mother cried like a tired river. Rosa kissed it. Leo took a photo and sent it to the blue scarf man. "We're going to need a trumpet player," he texted back. "I know 30. None of them will be James because that was then. But some of them will be somebody tomorrow." We opened the house with more casseroles. Only this time, nobody left them behind for us to forget in the icebox and find mold blooming in a week. Women carried babies on their hips up the front steps, their hands shaking as if holding invisible bags of groceries. Teenagers with backpacks heavier than their entire selves sat on the porch couches and stared at the hydrangeas as if they had never seen blue before. A nurse from the shelter came with a file folder that had more fluorescent post-its than pages and sat in our parlor and held people's stories like a lap full of purring cats. We put a little sign by the lemon tree. "Take one," it said. "Leave a coin if you want." Or a gratitude. Someone left a bandage note that said, "Thank you for the couch." Someone else left a braided friendship bracelet the color of sherbet. Someone else left a ring, not gold, a chunk of sea glass threaded on a string. Babies slept in borrowed pack and plays. A woman with rueful hair taught a long afternoon class on how to change a tire when you have 3 kids in the back seat. A public defender held office hours at the old oak table, under the burn mark where my grandfather had set down a hot cast iron skillet, and my grandmother had never, ever let him forget it. At night, when the women and the children were tucked into beds that had belonged to my great aunts, I sat on the porch steps with my mother and Rosa and Leo. We ate lemons dipped in sugar like we were all 3 years old again, sour and sweet, stinging our tongues in equal measure. Somewhere in the city, I imagine James walking home in rain with his collar up and some tiny joy in his mouth he could not name. "Do you think she was happy?" I asked, looking at the window where our faces floated against our house. In the end, my mother tilted her head. "I think she lived like a river," she said. "Sometimes her banks were hard. Sometimes she cut a new path in the night, so the morning surprised itself." "She kept the song," Rosa said, nodding toward the piano where the music paper lived in a frame, its note dots like fly specks across the staves. "She kept the man's love without blowing up our kitchen." Maybe that's happy enough for one life. Maybe it's gorgeously unfinished. Leo leaned back on his elbows. "And she gave us a job," he said, like a blessing. I needed a job. I thought of the photograph under my pillow. I thought of the lock of hair and the tiny tooth in an envelope. I thought of that baby, my aunt for 7 days, whose name was written in my grandmother's looped hand. Gloria. Glory. She had been gone all my life. She had been a dull, disappeared star around which all our need had orbited. Now she had a place. She had a tooth that said, "I bit the world once. Nothing you do can take that from me." "Maybe we're the finish," I said. Maybe that's what she thought. Don't sell the house. There's something you need to see in the walls. Maybe what we needed to see was that we can change it. That plaster isn't just plaster. It's a journal. "Read it," my mother whispered. "Read it, Maya. And then write back." I'm writing back. I'm writing to walls and to women and to the girl who thought a marriage could be a place that wouldn't leak, and to the mother who, because she could not speak, put her ears into a house and said, "Remember me for what I did when no one was looking." I'm writing to my grandmother and to the man she loved, and to the grandfather who thought he had bought a palace and found himself living with a queen who refused to be a prisoner. I'm writing to the part of me that looks like James, and to the part of me that looks like Alma, and to the part of me that looks like every woman who ever turned her back on a good thing, because the bad thing was louder. I sit at the piano, the music propped where it can look me in the eye. I place my fingers where his once did. I hit the first chord wrong. I hit the second chord a little less wrong. I hit the third in a way that makes Rosa look up from the cutting board, where she is making sandwiches for the women who took their children out of a house at midnight and ran without shoes. She smiles without teeth. I see my grandmother in that smile, in that "you're getting it" smile that sustained me through fractions and the names of the saints and the first time I burned the garlic. The Whitcomb Waltz is not sophisticated. That is its charm. It's the kind of song that understands you even when you're trying to be coy. It's a song for women who had a crush on their own lives and were embarrassed about it. It's a song for lemon trees that grew in the same dirt for 100 years and kept making lemons anyway, even when everyone moved away and came back only to take photographs and pretend it hadn't happened. By the time I get to the end the third time, my mother has sat down beside me with the photographs in her lap like a nap blanket. Leo is leaning in the doorway, his shoulder against the jamb, crying without wiping his face for once. Rosa is cutting the crusts off triangle sandwiches, as if she can make anything kinder, even bread. Outside, a woman with her hair in a messy bun and a baby on her hip walks up the front steps. She hovers at the edge of the porch rug, as if there is a threshold you can see and should not cross without being invited. I lift my hand and wave her in. She hesitates and then steps. The baby is crying, but quietly, the way babies cry when they know the adult holding them is making a decision that is important and cannot be undone. "Hi," I say softly. "Come in." She shifts the baby to her other hip. "Is this the place?" she asks, not sure she's supposed to ask. "From the news?" "The one for—" I nod. "Yes," I say. "This is the place." She steps inside, a little shiver crossing her shoulders as the house's temperature greets the night. Behind her, on the sidewalk, a neighbor pauses, takes it in, and then keeps walking, because he understands there are days when you must mind your own door, or you will come apart. The lemon tree shifts, leaves clapping quietly like an audience that isn't sure when to applaud. What was hidden is now in frames, on shelves, in our mouths. I have stopped being afraid of what the house knows. It knows what I know now, that secrets rot when they have no air. That air is cold and necessary. That sometimes you must tell the story out loud, so your blood will stop telling it in the dark. We are not selling the house. We are letting it do the thing it was always doing, all along, while we slept and while we cried and while we pressed envelopes of baby teeth under boards. We are letting it be a house, a container for days, a vessel for the weather, a thing that will one day fail in every frame and can still today be perfect. Rain-spotted windows, a peeled strip of ivy wallpaper tucked into a drawer next to a pizza menu, and a rosary. A piano with a chip taken out of middle C from when I was 5, and my cousin dropped a ladle on it. a staircase with a hidden drawer where a brave woman hid a trust deed, and a song to get us to this exact moment. The moment a stranger steps, trembling, into the good air. Welcome, I say, and the word feels like a note anyone can sing. From somewhere inside the walls, a house sighs. From somewhere deep, where plaster remembers fingers and paint remembers sun, the old love becomes a new one. We fill the kettle, we fill the rooms, we get out the extra blankets, we light the lamps, we live. Tired of chaos at home? Unlock simple, practical parenting tips to create a calm and loving vibe. Since 2010, Parenting Simply has been your community for connecting with your kids and mastering easy skills to transform your home. Our mission: slash stress for parents and kids with powerful communication and organizational hacks. Say goodbye to doom and gloom. Parenting can be fun, joyful, and fulfilling. You've got what it takes to be an amazing, loving parent, and we'll show you how. Click the link below for stress-free parenting tools and join our community. Dive into stories that stir your soul. Jackie Smith. Stories is your daily haven for raw emotions, courageous women, and authentic true life narratives. We weave tales of hope, strength, dreams, and the quiet miracles of everyday life. Our stories inspire, uplift, and remind you you're never alone. Subscribe now to experience a fresh, heartfelt chapter every day that sparks wonder and connection. Join our community and be part of the journey.